We covered my bike in part one. Now in part two, I'm going to go over all the different tools and consumables that I used in my amateur restoration, just to give you an idea of what you're getting into, the amount of things that you're going to need, what you want to have, some of the things that you may not know that you need to have. Now, I may be a little bit overboard on some of the things because I did have other bikes. So if you just need to get the bike running, you can cut some of these things out. However, you're probably going to take, hopefully, a couple items that you didn't think, you never thought that you'd need to have, and this might be useful for you in that regard. So what we're going to do, I always keep a bunch of miscellaneous parts. Well, not miscellaneous, I always label them and put them into their own thing based on which part of the bike I took it off of, and then I label it so I remember that when I come back later. I got a center stand, or sorry, a swing arm stand. If the bike you're working on has a center stand, you could probably get away with not having this. This thing's like 26 bucks at Harbor Freight. It's really useful for a lot of things. This thing is awesome. It is a motorcycle lift, and also Harbor Freight, maybe 80, 90 bucks, something like that. And just a quick note, it's a hydraulic lift. Make sure you use this when you let the bike down, let it down onto that, so this metal part actually braces the bike. If you leave the bike lifted up on this thing, the hydraulic lift can slowly lose its pressure and it will start to come down. Ask me how I know how that goes bad, because I was working on my FCR once. I left it up, didn't have this. About 3 hours later, I was away from the bike. Thing lost pressure, bike fell over, whole big shitstorm. But the big part of this is I laid out most of all of the stuff that I've used. And I'm going to go over each individual piece, and I'm going to do it rapid fire, see how quickly we can do this. Getting ready to go right to left. I want to point out I didn't start with all of this. This is what I've accumulated after 2 years. You're not going to start with all of this, but once you get done, there's a very good chance your collection of shit is going to look just like mine. So right here, I start with the bench grinder. I ended up putting a brass wheel on it. This thing is extremely useful for pulling a bunch of rust off real quick. Get the brass wire wheel. It's softer. It's not going to mar up steel surfaces nearly as much. The grinder I use occasionally, but the brass wheel I use a lot for pulling rust off. Fuel line, I just have probably 100 feet of miscellaneous different lengths or diameters of fuel line, clear, solid, etc. I can just see here 3/16, quarter, 5/16. You use a whole bunch of different types of fuel lines on the bikes. Now I've got different bikes, so I've got different ones. I think actually on the CL you can get away with a single one. I think I probably just got quarter all the way around, but it's kind of trial and error on which ones you're going to want. Buy like 5 of these things as shop towels. Don't fuck around with paper towels or anything like that. Get the good shop towels, and because you're going to be using a lot of them. Fork oil, you're going to need some of this. This is hygroscopic, which means it's going to be pulling water out of the atmosphere. Make sure it's sealed up tightly. Basically, you really want to use the whole thing, or not store it for a long period of time. Honestly, this may not even be good anymore, considering how long I haven't used that in. Rotella T4, the dyno oil, is what I use in all of my bikes. It's a real good motorcycle oil. Is it the best one? Probably not. It's a really, really damn good one, and it is cheap. You could pick this stuff up so cheap, and knowing that I have the same oil in all the bikes, I change my oil way more often than is recommended, just because I know it's cheap and I know I want to have good oil in it. So pick up a funnel. Fuel filters, I've tried so many different kinds. These are the ones that work best on the CL for me. It's going to be trial and error with those things potentially. This one worked well for me. Got a couple carb kits here. I put new carb kits in. These are actually, I thought these were the wrong ones, and I realized these were actually the right ones. So I got 2 extra carb kits. I got an extra clutch lever. If I ever go on a long ride, this is something I would carry with me. Reason being, if you crash or something like that and you lost your brake lever, you could still limp it home because you still got a rear brake. But if your clutch lever breaks off, you can't clutch anymore. So I like to have that extra spare clutch lever. Vacuum hose, cheap. I cut new vacuum hoses for everything. Speaking of just miscellaneous parts, you just want to have so many different bolts you're going to end up pulling off. If you don't have one of them, it derails your whole afternoon. You got to run to the hardware store for like 1 or 2 bolts. Miscellaneous sport bike stainless steel bolt pack is great to have. I got different vacuum caps. The Zerks you probably don't need to do. This is just something I wanted to do, kind of to learn about how it worked and whatnot. These are different grease fittings. So I put the grease fittings on the swing arm axle. Cotter pins, don't skimp on these. You're going to probably wreck most of the cotter pins that you pull off the bike, or they're already wrecked. And cotter pins just a great security thing to have in different situations on the bike, different castle nuts and whatnot. You want to get a a cotter pin through there to make sure that nut's not going to back off. Really, really useful thing that saved me a ton of time is having a digital caliper. I was using an analog one for the longest time, and I don't like doing math in my head, and this thing has just made my life a lot easier. Husky, Home Depot, I think this thing was like 20 bucks. Saves me a lot of time. If you've never done a non-sealed battery before, you're in for a treat. I mean, I'm assuming you don't have much experience with this. If you do, you already know this. But you need to end up filling the battery with battery acid and into each of the 6 cells, and you need something to get the acid in there. So what else do we got here? Mother's Mag and aluminum polish. This is what I use on any steel and aluminum surface to try to polish it up. Do not use this on chrome. It will destroy the chrome. This takes a lot of metal off, and chrome is like, if I'm guessing, it's like, I don't know, it's like 2/1000ths of an inch, and you're going to pull it all off. So don't use this. This is great for steel and aluminum. If you're going to do chrome, use something chrome for chrome. The torch is for removing bolts. The torch plus PB blaster or some kind of penetrating fluid plus an impact driver is how you're going to be able to pull all those crankcase screws off that have been stripped to hell, and extremely useful to go put it through several different heat cycles. Penetrating fluid, try to get the penetrating fluid in there, do it day after day, and eventually the thing's going to come out. What do we got here? Actually, speaking of the bolts, this is what they look like. These are the old bolts. They probably look like that when they come out, and that is not fun to try to get out with a Phillips head or a JIS screwdriver. In fact, it probably won't come out, which is when you're going to need that torch, the penetrating fluid, and the impact driver, and a lot of sweat. Something I do, I just pick up a bunch of different length stainless steel Allen bolts that if I just find one that I need to replace, I throw these in. Common Motor actually sells a specific kit for the CB350, CL350. I'd pick one of those things up there, like 30, 35 bucks from them. But just to have miscellaneous spares on hand in case I run into other things, it's good to have. Other things I have like different nuts and whatnot if I go and replace them. Chain breaker, you probably won't need this for the CB350, CL350. I think most chains you're probably going to have a master link, in which case you don't need this. But if you do have a riveted chain, you're going to need one of these. And I skimped out on this. I bought the cheap one, and I broke the most important piece in here, which is the chain breaker little thing here. So probably not the thing I should have skimped out on, but you never know what you can and can't skimp out on. This is probably one I shouldn't have. More miscellaneous parts. I got different hooks, just nuts, bolts. Actually, that's just some washers, different springs, just so I have them, so I'm not running to the grocery store the auto parts store if, you know, I don't have it. It just derails an afternoon. Something that can hold you up if you're an idiot like myself. Spark plug. When I got this, I was like, I know I bought the right spark plug. I don't quote me on this one. I know this is for my KE 100, but basically what screwed me up on this, brand new spark plug, okay, and I went to put the coil plug on it, and it wouldn't fit, not even close. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. That's exactly what they recommended. Guess what? This thing comes off. Grab a pliers, that comes right off. Then it sits on there. Again, somebody who does this a lot, they know that. But that's something that stumped me for a night. So I lost a night trying to figure out why can't the spark plugs go in. Spark plug gapping tool, you can get the little round cheapie. Not that this thing was very expensive. This is like $4 on Amazon. But the little round ones, you can gap it for sure. The issue with doing that with the little round ones is that when you try to move it up, you don't want to be damaging, I don't know what it's called, but that piece down there, that thing's it's sensitive, and if you start pushing down on it, you can damage it. So this tool allows you to actually get under the spark plug and gap it without actually putting pressure on the part that's more likely to be damaged. So when I bought a chain that was too big, ended up taking a link out. This is that rubber piece I'd mentioned before that's likely going to break, that holds your gas tank in. You're probably going to buy one of these, or you can actually just get away with, you know, continuing to use that one. But if you want it to be right, you're going to end up getting a new one. So keeping on going, this chain cleaning brush is awesome. Again, this might have been a Harbor Freight thing, but this thing's awesome. Just pulls all the rust and all that crap off way quicker than you could do otherwise. Marvel Mystery Oil, if you got a seized engine, like say the thing's not, you know, moving around when you buy it, that stuff is great. Pull the spark plugs, put some of that in each of the cylinders, wait about a half hour, put it in second gear, try rocking it back and forth. I bet there's a good chance you can end up getting the engine to actually turn over again with that. This DuPont chain saver, it's wax based. What's nice about it, now I don't have a ton of miles on this thing yet, but I just switched over all my bikes to be using it, and it doesn't sling like all the other stuff that I'd been using. And in that regard, it's great. So I saw it recommended on several forums. I'm thinking this is going to be something I'm going to really like. Looking at some of the other miscellaneous crap I got on here, you're going to need some of this for compressed air for cleaning out a carburetor, especially all the little holes and whatnot inside of them. Yeah, you can have your compressor, and I mean that's a good thing to have as well. But having a little thing of this to be able to shoot it right there, it saves you a ton of time. Plus, if you don't have a compressor, well, that's what you're going to be using. Other stuff on here, Tap Magic if I'm going to tap a new hole anywhere. I like putting some cutting fluid on there. What else I want to point out? WD-40. Probably don't want to be lubricating a whole bunch of stuff with it, but I've actually found a lot of uses for this. It's really good for cleaning, and it's also really good to use as like kind of a fogging thing or on different parts like that I think are going to rust, surface rust and whatnot. I just put a little bit of this on there and I, rub it on, and it keeps it from rusting, which is great. Though the grease that I use all over the bike is this Valvoline full synthetic, the Sin Power. That's pretty much everywhere. Anything I'm greasing, I use this Valvoline stuff. So the electric degreaser and whatnot, you could probably get away with not having that. The penetrating fluid, PB Blaster, I've actually bought a whole gallon of this since, but have some in the spray can, that's all you need. But having the gallon to soak stuff in is a luxury. The cleaning stuff that you want is, you're gonna need some brake clean, some carburetor cleaner. That's what people are gonna say, those are the two things you're gonna need. I'll tell you, starting fluid works better than anything else. And I learned that at the go-kart track. That's what people clean out the go-karts with after every race, clean the chain, all that kind of stuff. Cut the bullshit, get some starting fluid. That's what I use. Talking about nasty stuff, aircraft remover. This is how I remove paint. This is the worst stuff that I use. And I also have this in an aerosol. I would not recommend getting the aerosol. Reason being, if it's really light paint, it works. Or you can just use the whole thing of aerosol on there and achieve the same thing as this. However, if you want to cut through the crap and go quickly, get the can of this, pour it into an empty pineapple can, get a brush that you're going to throw away, and then you wipe it over the paint, and this will eat the paint right off. A couple of the paints I used, actually pretty much all of them, for the exhaust, these are high temp paints, VHT primer, VHT top coat. There was a Rust-Oleum primer. I used all of that, and all the black frame and all the black parts are this black enamel. Again, if you want to do a real righteous paint job, you need a spray booth, and you don't need a spray booth, but what you need is two-component paint. The spray booth will keep you in a clean, sterile environment, not get dust all over everything, but two-component paint's going to hold up a lot better than the job I did, but it is what it is. So for removing rust and all the other stuff on there and polishing up surfaces, brass wool is going to be the softest stuff that you can use. These, what are these called? Not Brillo pads, Scotch-Brite pads. These are pretty good, and then I just get a whole different pack of different grit sandpaper from like 80 grit all the way up to 2000 grit. So a whole bunch of different types of sandpaper that I end up using. I think that's it for the parts on here. These are the forks that I mentioned that were trashed. I actually put a lot of work into getting these lowers looking really nice, and it was a whole bunch of wasted time. These actually have brand new seals in them too, and I don't even get to enjoy them because, as I said, these things are bent. Like the bike was in a front end crash or something, and they're both bent in the same way, and that's why I couldn't get the thing to line up correctly. So 50 bucks at seals I threw away. This part where it's all marred up here, yeah, it looks nasty, but a lot of this is covered up and just held, and that's so this part doesn't matter as much. This part needs to be as smooth as possible, and that chrome has to be there, because as it moves up and down inside the fork lower and past the seal, if it's marred, it'll destroy the seal. These actually looked really good, which is why I wanted to use them again. This looked nasty, but most of this gets covered up. But just had to learn the hard way, and that's why I ended up having to buy brand new forks. So I guess it's good to have these on hand in case anything ever happens so I can use the lowers. It's not a bad thing to have extra lower parts and everything like that. What did I hide in here? I always keep all the extra parts just in case whatever I buy so I can look at it, make sure it makes sense. These are the old points and whatnot, old condenser. One of the most common upgrades people will recommend for these bikes is pretty much universal. This is a regulator, this is the rectifier. Solid, or not solid state, I guess they're all solid state, but pretty common upgrade is to get a single unit regulator rectifier and put that on the bike. It's something that I did, and I just drilled into the bottom of the battery box and put that on there. You remove these two. There's a lot of videos on how to do that. Extremely common. I would absolutely recommend this. I'm pretty sure everybody else will. This is what one of the old coils looked like. Took this thing off. As I mentioned before, this thing tested out all right. I just don't know if I want to completely trust something that says, you know, it's that old. It's going to give out at some point. I just don't know when it's going to give out. This is what the old air filters looked like. Now, these don't look good, but I probably could have gotten the bike running with them. They're expensive, man, to get these new things. And you look at it, you're like, you got to replace this whole thing when you do the air filter? I mean, it seems like you'd be able to replace the filter element or something like that. And I know people have done just the filter element, and there's different ways you can kind of get some paper and glue the whole thing together. And these are like 50 bucks a piece, and I decided I want to get this thing running. I was just going to replace them. So that's what the whole air filter looks like, though, which is pretty beastly. And then just miscellaneous parts. And I always keep all the old parts. And I always leave myself a note. And I put the part in the bag of what I pulled off. Because if you start more than one project on the bike, and when I mean project, I mean if you were working on the front forks and then you move to the back turn signal or something like that, and if you get caught up on something, when you come back to your parts from the original project, you may have no idea what they are. So I always leave myself little notes, and I always put them in a bag, and I always put each individual like sectionalize them. So if I'm pulling parts, if I'm pulling pilot jets out, I'll put all the pilot jet stuff in a single bag. Have bush light on hand. It's important to stay hydrated. Big thing on here, what I want to point out, I've never been a safety person, and I probably will never be a major safety person, but if there's one thing I can mention and try to drive home in this video, it's that put safety glasses all over the place. If you ever see these things on sale where they're like, so you can get like a 4-pack for 10 bucks or something, buy that. Why it really struck home to me is when I was screwing around with that aircraft stripper, and then I saw a piece of the aircraft stripper get stuck on the lens of this when I was holding it once, or I had them on my head. And it kind of hit home with me that if that would have hit my eye, I would have been blind. And if I'm blind, then I don't get to do this. I don't get to ride motorcycles. I don't get to look at Pornhub. I don't get to do pretty much anything I enjoy doing. And that would really stink. So safety, not the biggest thing with me, but Jesus Christ, this one is extremely important. Or long term, not as much as when you're painting, unless you're doing like some 2-component. I don't think you'd be using an isocyanate, but a respirator is great to have. If you're painting, you should do that. More importantly, though, when you're pulling tons of rust off, that stuff is flying all over the place, and I can't imagine that's any bit good to be breathing in. So having a dust mask, even just a little mask, not a whole respirator, just the mask is going to help you out. You should get one of those. Flashlight to be able to see what you're doing. The head-mounted one, kind of like I'm wearing this camera right now, really useful, but also just having a little flashlight's useful. People always say your hands and your eyes. Those are the two most important things to protect. I mean, you use those probably more than anything else, and just have them on hand. You can get these things cheap. They could save, maybe not save your life, but they're going to save a whole lot of luxuries you have in your life. That's it for safety. I just wanted to mention that. Crimper tool. This is something I would recommend not skimping on. If you're going to be redoing a bunch, well, you don't get that choice. You may have to redo a bunch of the electrical terminals. And if you're doing it the cheap AutoZone stuff, whatnot, it's not going to be fun. Get the nice 3.5, 3.9 terminals, crimp them with this. Speaking of those are right over here. I mentioned the 3.5 and the 3.9 because I only got the 3.5s at first. These are what you're going to be using, the terminals, male and female, and then use the covers over the ends or put those on before you crimp anything. Even when you know that, you're going to forget that several times, but put that on before, because you can't fit it over the terminals. Not the female terminal, at least. But 3.5 and 3.9, because there's different size wires on the bike, and I didn't know that at first. I just got these, and all of a sudden things didn't fit. So, you know, I got a little bit screwed on there. I'll get back to the electrical stuff in a second. Picks, really important for going through the carburetor. Also, it's not as important on the CB350, CL350, but like when I'm pulling a carburetor rack out of an inline four or whatnot, when you're trying to guide cables and get them into the nesting spot, this 90-degree pick is the best. And these Husky ones were probably like $8. I bet you can do this at Harbor Freight for $1. Not like you have to go nuts on these. So they're really useful to have. Wire stripper for those wires you're going to be terminating. Multimeter, again, this is a freebie from Harbor Freight. You go buy, I don't know, a pack of gum and they give you a free thing. This one's really useful. You can also, I mean, you can spend a whole lot more on one, but just have this, learn how to use it. Lots of YouTube videos on how to use this thing. Really important for troubleshooting those electrical issues, and you're going to have them. It's pretty much a given that you're going to have them. Feeler gauge, you're going to need this to check the valves. I can't remember what else you might need the feeler gauge for, but I mean, the big thing is doing valve service with the feeler gauge. Should mention, I like having print. You can also get the PDF, but I really like having print. You can write yourself notes. I don't know. I like to be able to walk around with the thing. That being said, these manuals, especially these older ones, aren't the greatest. And people always say, go to the manual. And I'm telling you, the manual does not tell you everything you need to know. And you can even see, over the course of time, manuals have gotten better. This is a 60s one, or a 70s one. This is what a 90s one looks like, 80s one looks like, all the way to 2018. They just keep getting bigger because they write better manuals. The old one isn't the best. What I found is even more useful than the manual is printing out a parts list. Oh, I just farted. A parts list of all the exploded diagrams of everything, because some things just may not make sense. I mean, sometimes a manual just says, like, I don't know, remove half the bike. You're like, really? How do I do that? Having the exploded diagram makes everything make way more sense. I wish I would have done this earlier, because these have been probably the most useful thing I've used on the bike. Allen bolts, or Allen keys, hex keys, you can get away with just these. Husky, it's going to be all metric. You don't really need the SAE ones. Splurge at Harbor Freight. Again, you don't have to go nuts on these, but this thing's like $8, $9 for the metrics. And having the T-handles, extremely useful. Extremely useful. The impact driver I was mentioning earlier for taking those crankcase bolts off, or screws off, the way this thing works, when people are talking about an impact driver, manual impact driver, they're not talking about an air tool or an electric tool or anything like that. They're talking about this thing. And what you do is you put the bit in, the correct bit, put it in the hole, and it is going to be a hole. It's not going to look like a good thing when you're pulling off. But basically, when you have it like this, and pretend this is a hammer, when you strike it, it moves this thing counterclockwise about 12 degrees. So continually striking it puts a ton of force and a little bit of turn on it. And you can see I've actually flattened this thing, and you can see how bad I had to work, because now that I'm looking at it, this thing is pretty much destroyed. Look how cockeyed that thing is. Yeah. I didn't have a whole lot of fun. Well, I would have had even less fun if I didn't have this. This is a manual impact driver. If your bolts are seized, you're going to need that. Speaking of those bolts, JIS screwdriver. This is a JIS screwdriver. This is a Phillips. Phillips are meant to cam out and, not cam out, and torque out, and then they can't turn a bolt anymore. And what that results in is rounding those bolts, especially when you're trying to pull them off. If you don't have the correct amount of anti-seize or any anti-seize or anything like that. Speaking of anti-seize, you have to get this. This is going to last you the rest of your life. But put this on any crankcase bolts, stuff like that, where you're going to pull those bolts on and off. It's going to help them come off way easier. Spark plugs need that. Don't put that on like a sprocket, where if that comes off, you'll die. Instead, you're going to need Loctite for that. Speaking of Loctite, Do I have Loctite? Yeah. You're probably going to want blue Loctite. A couple spots you're going to want this is like your sprockets and whatnot. You're not going to want the red. I don't think there's anywhere you use the red. Red, you require heat to get off. You try to get that off with your hand and just without, I don't know, an impact wrench, it's just not going to budge and you just destroy whatever you're working on. But I absolutely recommend this Vessel JIS screwdriver if you want one that you can carry with you. This is a Procon, I don't know, but it takes these 3 different bits, 6 different bits because it's 2-sided. Little tiny screwdriver, and I even modified this one a little bit, but getting into different parts of your carburetor, you need a tiny little screwdriver, especially to like pull out pilot jets and whatnot and change the air fluid. The air fluid one's pretty easy on this bike, but other bikes you absolutely need a tiny screwdriver, and this one's even too long. I have to go to smaller bits and cases. Spoke wrench, if you're going to be trying to true out the wheel, well, you need a spoke wrench to do that. You can probably get away with finding the right wrench, but you may not have one small enough. So you may need this. If you have the toolkit on your bike, you may actually still have this already. Dymo label maker. This is like one of the best $10 I've ever spent. So you can go and waste a ton of money on big name ones and whatever. And we got one for work, and it was like $200 that I ended up spending on the thing. This thing's better. I don't think I spent more than $12 for this thing. And if you get the bootlegged fucking tape things that come with it, don't go buy them at Office Depot. Buy them on Amazon. You can get like a 27-footer for $3, or you can go to Office Depot, pay $20 for that same roll. This thing's awesome. I label everything. It's not even just motorcycle stuff. I just label everything in the house. So I think that's it for this part. Now we're hitting the home stretch. What we got here, I haven't used this on the bike yet, but these are tire levers. So when you're pulling a tire off, you're doing a tire change, you need a couple of these levers. I have used these on different bikes' tires, and they worked out pretty well. By well, I mean you're still going to swear a lot. It's going to suck. Changing a tire manually by yourself is never going to be a fun thing. You can always just pay the $30 a tire to drop it off at the shop and have them change it. The reason I didn't is because actually I do have a tire balancer, but it's missing. I loaned it to a coworker. But I dropped some tires off, had them mounted, and then they said, oh, if you want them balanced, it's $15 a wheel. It's like, okay. So I told them, don't bother. I brought them home, and I put them on a tire balancer. I bought a Tusk tire balancer, which reviewed really well, and I balanced them myself, and the balancer was $80. So I just got to do like one more set of wheels, and I've made my money back. So, I mean, I'm kind of even. So, yeah, probably... Depending on how frustrated you want to be, just bring the tires to a shop. But if you really want to get into it yourself, you're going to need some tire levers, a tire balancer, and some weights. I always get these are paint mixing cups, and you really don't need the graduations on them, but that way I can know what's in them. I can put a label on it. Like, this isn't a motorcycle part, but I've just been soaking a drum brake actuator for my F-150 for a while because the thing was seized up. But anyway, I just got miscellaneous stuff all over the place. If I'm soaking stuff in PB Blaster or whatnot, it's nice to be able to put the lid over them and know that it's sealed up. If you're putting some organic solvent that's going to be like explosive or it's going to keep expanding, leave it cracked open or else the lid's just going to pop off the top. I use these prison trays when I'm working on anything. So I always just take this out next to me when I go next to the bike. I lay this on the ground, and any parts I take off, say if I'm working on a carburetor, I'll put, you know, the pilot jets over here, the main jets over here, the diaphragm over here, etc. That way I'm not mixing the parts up. You could probably find better trays than this one. I just like this one because it makes me feel like I'm in Shawshank Redemption or something like that, and it's worked out real well. So having something like that to organize things, real good. Another thing you can skimp on without buying them is a torque wrench. However, when you over torque something, you can get screwed. And specifically, something I did on this bike, which takes a long time to fix, is on these valve covers on this 84 Interceptor. If you torque that too much and you rip the rod out or something like that, it's not fun to replace, and you'll be really upset that you didn't buy the $10 torque wrench when Harbor Freight has a special. Make sure they have a special because they're kind of expensive normally. And if you buy something that isn't Harbor Freight, these are really expensive. But Harbor Freight usually runs specials on these things. Something I want to mention. Basically, when you set the torque rating you want, your foot-pounds or newton meters, etc., on here, and once you hit a certain torque value, it'll click, and then you're there. So if it's 10 foot-pounds, 20 foot-pounds, if I set 20 foot-pounds, I go till there, it clicks, and then I'm at 20 foot-pounds. When you're done with these, untorque it all the way before you store it, or else it'll screw up the calibration. It'll basically ruin the torque wrench. I guess I'll figure that one out later, huh? What is it? Oh, there's it goes. Anyway, I got a 1/4, 3/8, and 1/2 inch, and I didn't buy them all at once. I bought them when they ended up on sale. What do we got in here? You may, again, another thing you can get away with not having, but people are going to say, did you do a compression test? This is a compression tester. Basically, you pull the spark plug out after it's warm, or else you're not going to get the actual compression reading, because it's going to read lower if it's not warm. Basically, you pull the spark plug out, use the right adapter, hook this thing up, kick it over a couple times, and you'll figure out what your compression is. So this is a timing light. And when you're setting the points, you're going to need to use this. Basically, this thing will trigger on and off depending on whether or not the point is at the point that the spark is going to be going off, and you're going to use that to set up the timing. Dremel is something I hope you don't have to use, but there's a very good chance you will have to use it, especially if you're fighting bolts. That's the only thing I've used this thing for, is using one of the come here, using one of the saw blade adapters, and if I got a screw that I cannot get out with an impact driver or something like that, I throw this on the Dremel, I cut a notch, and then I use a flathead screwdriver to be able to pull it out. That's pretty much last resort, because it's usually not fun to do that. I don't like those backwards screw extractors. I know some people swear by them, and I've gotten them to work, and I've got some sets of them here. The screw's already, I mean, it's screwed. It's already getting thrown away. That seems to work way better for me. So I just use that. Adjustable wrenches, don't make a habit of using these things on the bike, but it's probably a good idea to have 2 of them, specifically for when you're pulling off the rear axle. When you're pulling that off, probably a good idea to have these, because there's a good chance, I actually don't even think I have big enough wrenches. I think I go up to 19s here. I don't even think that's big enough to pull the rear axle off. So there's a good chance you're going to have to use the adjustable wrenches to do so, and you'll probably need the 2 of them. Do not make a habit out of using these, because you're going to end up rounding bolts, especially if you're using on small bolts. Just don't make a habit of doing that, but it's probably a good thing to have. Sockets, there's a good chance you got a socket set. If you don't have a socket set, run your way down to Harbor Freight. They got socket sets. What I wanted to point out in here, this little guy's awesome. It's like this little U adapter, and it's for spark plugs. So getting into weird areas on the spark plug, CL350 not very hard, but other bikes, oh, this thing is so useful, and this was like $5. Saves a lot of time with that one. So I like that thing quite a bit. What else we got here? Tap and die set. Again, you probably don't need this, but if you're doing a restoration, you're restoring things, you might want this. So I bought this because I wanted to do the Zerk fittings on the swing arm. So basically, I needed to bore into and cut a bigger tap into the swing arm. So I ended up using this a whole lot more than just for that, because there were so many different holes that were just, it was so crusty and nasty to get a screw through. So I went through, I grabbed that Tap Magic, I ran, I rethreaded it basically, not rethreaded, I just cleaned the threads with the different taps here. And all of a sudden, screws started going in and out way easier. You put the anti-seize on there, and I don't know, it just makes a much nicer experience for working on the bike. Extractor set, I don't know how many circ clips are actually on a CB350, CL350, but you may end up needing snap ring pliers. Oh, I know where you're gonna need it. You're gonna need it on the forks, 100%. I don't think for the CB350 you'll need this awesome tool, but I needed this for the Interceptor forks, and this thing gets down and it gets to business right away instead of screwing around with these other ones where you just can't get a good angle. So those are useful. A couple, again, this is on the, in saving money, I would cheap out on these pry bars. I mean, again, Harbor Freight, like $6 for 3 different size pry bars. There's other things I'm recommending to go expensive on, but you cannot go expensive on everything unless you have unlimited funds, and I don't have that, and I'm going to guess most people don't either. So that's something I would recommend potentially skimping on. In here, we've got a carburetor synchronizer. Basically, this is to make sure that the carburetor is opening and closing at the exact same time. You can get away with not having this. The bike may not run perfectly, but you can get it running really damn close with something that's called a bench sync. Basically, you need a little piece of fishing wire to make sure that the butterflies are actuating at the exact same time. If you're synchronizing 4 different carburetors, like I've done on inline 4 engine, something like that, this thing's really useful. You just get down to business so much quicker with it, and people will say, hey, did you sync your carbs? Well, I don't know. Did you? Most people probably haven't even heard of that. I didn't until I had to. You can make your own makeshift kind of thing. YouTube videos, again, you're going to need some 20-ounce bottles of Coke and whatnot, but $65 or something like that, yeah, you're at the point where you can make that decision. The thing is, if I'm doing it for my first time and I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know if my jerry-rigged little contraption is actually going to give me the readings I want. In theory, they should, but I don't know enough. I've learned enough working on bikes to know that what I think is reality oftentimes isn't. Grease gun, you're not going to need this. I did this sort of luxury, like I said, with the swing arm. This way I could put the grease fitting over it and not have to take the whole rear wheel off. CL350, you're not going to need this, but the 350F you might. I think that had front disc with yeah, disc brake, probably has brake fluid, brake bleeder. Again, you can get away with not using that. There's other ways to bleed your brakes without a Mighty Vac, but it was a luxury. Battery tender, obviously you're gonna need that thing. And so that's it for this table. Home stretch, we're almost done. Sorry, I had like 2 more little things. We had, I use heat shrink on a lot of things, and then tire inflator. So there's lots of other random stuff, files, different bits, whatnot. Like I said, I always keep extra safety glasses. Something I have not delved into yet because I haven't had the balls to do it is to actually learn how to weld. This is like the next frontier for me. If you're seeing this and you're a mechanic or you're somebody who knows how to weld, you're already laughing at the fact that this is a little Harbor Freight arc welder. I get it. I don't even know if I'll be able to strike an arc, but honestly, electricity scares me. It just scares me. So I want to do more research before I get into this thing. It was a Father's Day present for my dad like 8 years ago, and neither of us could actually get it to work right. Probably had the wrong sticks, but you know what? It's about time that I'm getting there. So anyway, that is my little spiel about all the stuff that I ended up putting together for doing my restoration. You might end up with a stupid ass parts bike that you bought from a coworker without actually seeing it, that you thought was going to be somewhat useful, which, I mean, outside of the kickstand, I'm not really sure what I'm going to be using on this thing, but I mean, I actually bought it for the gas tank, only seeing the other side, and now there's that. I don't know which kind of animal cut the front of this fender off. Like, that was a cool idea. This is what 50-year-old rubber looks like. Anyway, that is the bike. I appreciate you watching this video. I hope I save one person one headache. If I do that, it's been worth it. I'm excited for this bike. I'm excited for the flurries to stop. And thank you for watching. I appreciate it.